were actually in contact with any extraterrestrials on a regular basis. Now remember, we're in 1975 here. Ptah said no, that there were no governments on Earth having open contacts with extraterrestrials. Now in 92, this might seem a little curious because many of us are becoming to believe that the American government, at any rate, is probably having ongoing contacts or relations with the people from Zeta Reticuli, sometimes referred to as the Greys. We don't know for sure that they are, but it seems to point to that. There's a lot of evidence that the Greys are here abducting people. But interestingly enough, in 75 anyway, Billy had been told that the Greys are coming here, that there are beings from Zeta Reticuli coming here, and that they do abduct people from time to time. But Ptah says at this point that the governments really aren't in open contact with any of these races. And by the way, that was reiterated in '89. I asked Billy about that again, if he had any information about the American government being involved with the beings from Zeta Reticuli. And he said no, that it was greatly exaggerated, wasn't what it appeared to be, because we're hearing a lot of stories about how our American government is covering up the fact that they're working with the aliens. The Plejadians say no. They say that they're not. As a matter of fact, it says in Billy's notes that, and it doesn't mention the American government, it says that several governments are actually experimenting, though, with flying discs of their own. They have some of them working, and in quite many cases, these flying discs that are reported by people and thought to be extraterrestrial are our very own. He says no governments are having actual open contact with ETs. If they were, they wouldn't be trying to hunt down the ships. Besides, he says that the technology of the Plejadians is high enough. If they were having any trouble with the American government, there would be no problem with them being able to make their ships safe, and they could stop the American government from, bothering them if they wanted to. He did comment that not beam ships, but flying disc, as he called them, were being built and had been being built on Earth since 1941. He said in Germany the first one was designed in 1941. Its first test flight was in February 1945. At that time, that ship was able to go 12,500 meters high up in the air and could travel at speeds of 2,000 kilometers per hour. It was obviously built in Germany during the reign of Adolf Hitler. He says at the end of the war, when Germany was losing, that the Germans destroyed pretty much all they could of the flying discs so nobody could get a hold of them. But they weren't entirely successful at this. That much of the gears and quite a few of the plans were discovered by the Allies, causing the Russians and the Americans both to have little idea what they were doing, and they had copies of their designs, and that these governments had continued to try to design and build some of their own. Currently, he remarked, and he didn't say the American government, he says that some governments are building flying discs up to 100 meters in diameter, and that they had, now this is in 75, and they were using, as a propulsion system, they were using explosion-type motors and referred to them as atom-splitting motors, and that you get the impression in the book that he's talking about some sort of either an atomic reactor or a nuclear reactor sometime in these types of ships, because he says there's a lot of problems with them. They don't fly very well. They frequently crash and have to set down, and they are plagued with the problem of radiation. That quite often people who work on the ships will suffer from radiation illness, and there are several instances where the ships are forced to land because of problems, and the people around the ships then working on them or even attracted to them that may come up to them can also suffer from the radiation burns. He says frequently, oddly enough too, which kind of surprises them, is on some occasions these flying discs developed by the governments, when they may have been seen or they are forced to land and people see them, they will explain to the people, they will come out of the ships and tell them that they are ETs. They'll tell them that they are gods and they're from other planets. And why they would do this, I'm not real sure. But he says that it happens frequently. In some cases, they will even go to the trouble of kidnapping the people that see the ships so the people can't tell anybody else about it. And wherever these people wind up, I have no idea. But he says quite often, flying discs that are seen in the air and so forth are mistaken as extraterrestrial when they're really not. It's kind of a strange thing, isn't it? Billy said he knew about this for many years, but he had been told to keep quiet about it. But Ptah told him that there's no longer any reason to. then now's a very good time for him to reveal this and to let people know it, because too many people are claiming to see extraterrestrial ships and claiming to have contact with extraterrestrials, and Ptah says it's just not true. Most of these so-called extraterrestrials are ships of our own and people of our own. Well, they continue on now, the great spacers moving through space again, and they're going to have a series of stops, and they're showing Billy some rather unusual things. Their first stop, and there are some unusual names here, we don't know how accurate they are, but they're names that Billy's giving to destinations here, so I guess so he has some reference. And the first place they stop is some galaxy called Nesar, N-E-S-A-R. And Semyosi is explaining to Billy the problem there, that it was destroyed years ago. And he says about 967 years ago, people from this particular planet, I guess you could call them Nesarians or something, they came to Earth on an expedition. And they actually had an expedition on Earth where they stayed for about 50 years. After that time period, after studying all our culture and our religions and our way of life, they returned back to their own world. Apparently their technology wasn't very good, because Semyosi said it shows that it took them 4 years to get back to their world. They had a lot of trouble getting back. When they did, they were explaining all about the religions that they learned about on Earth. They were explaining all about what they had done for the 50 years that they had been there. A lot of arguments broke out on their world about the religions. I can just imagine what they were arguing about. But they sent another group of people back to Earth for some more reconnaissance to find out some more about it. They returned 5 years later. By the time they got back, the different planets of this race had already fallen into a war. They started building churches. There were arguments about one religion than another. They got into a terrible war with one another, and a couple of planets became destructed. The war didn't stop there. They kept fighting, and pretty soon other planets fell in, and they caused so many problems in the magnetic fields and orbits of several solar systems. When the fighting started, the part of the universe started falling into itself. Apparently, when you upset the magnetic stability somehow of a solar system or a galaxy, things started going wrong and more planets started falling in. As more planets started falling towards the center, it threw off the magnetic field of the entire galaxy, making the orbits of many systems unstable, and over the course of some time, many planets started falling in, and the center part of the galaxy now was in total destruction, with thousands of planets which had literally fallen together in like a large clump. And they had cited this to Billy as the sort of megalomania that can get run away with when war breaks out over really ridiculous issues. They continued on, and this next area they went to is called a galaxy called ASAP. It's spelled ASAP, so I guess that's the galaxy as soon as possible we've always heard about. There's a planet in there called Desom, D-E-S-O-M, and it was a planet with human life on it. And Billy was allowed to, through the screens, they got pretty close, and he could see the grass huts and so forth. And living here on this planet were people you might consider in the Middle Ages. One interesting thing to note here that Ptah mentioned to him that they have a moon that's about ready, well, not about it. They predicted within 3,200 years that the moon would crash into their sun and would cause some problems there. And it would apparently throw their planet out of orbit. And Billy was concerned. He said, well, what would they do? Because they're, a Dark Ages or Middle Ages sort of development here. Ptah's mentioned that there should be enough time for them to develop technologies well enough that they would be able to escape from their own planet. If they had not by that time, and they would be watched, then others would come to help them and get them off of there so that they weren't destroyed. The next section they go to, there's a galaxy called Nippon, N-E-P-O-N, and there's a star system there.